I beg you, please keep the river clean. No more trash in the water, keep the river clean. Let me preserve for the future, keep the river clean. You're so fresh.
Good morning, Soufriere. Good morning. Welcome to another episode of our Flowing Clean project, where we have with us our guest for today, Dr. Stephen King. Apologies for our late start. We had some technical issues in studio with internet and getting our platform prepared. I am your host for this morning, as usual, Nadia Cazaubon. And we are talking today about another component of our Flowing King project, the epidemiology component dealing with the incidence and prevalence of cancer in Soufriere. Welcome, Dr. Stephen King. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning, Nadia. I'm well. Nice to be with you.
Nice to see you on camera. Before we begin, let me just wish everybody a very happy Tuesday morning. I hope everybody enjoyed their carnival yesterday. I think we had a relatively incident-free, except for an altercation that I saw that we had last night, and everybody is back in the work mode. So today, Dr. King will be discussing with us his role on the committee dealing with the cancer epidemiology and water quality. And we will talk about what we have started doing and what we expect to get from this component of the project. So, Dr. King, let me first allow you to introduce yourself. Everybody knows you as a pathologist, but for you to introduce yourself as a member of the Jeff Steering Committee. Tell us a little bit about your role on that committee.
Okay, yes. I've been serving on the Jeff Small Grants Program Committee for the last 4 years. My role there is really, as a medical practitioner, to bring some of the health components that Jeff often debates, because our environment is closely linked with our health. So we cannot be healthy without a healthy environment. So that has been my main role, I think, on the Jeff committee, right? And this particular project relevant to Soufriere is exactly that. We're talking about the environmental health of water, the water health in the Soufriere community. A very important project. It's something that has not been done in St. Lucia before, as far as I am aware. I've been in St. Lucia, but I used to be the DMO in Soufriere back in 1983, from 1983 to 1985. So since then, I have been sort of in the health business and connected to Soufriere. I came back as a pathologist in 1989, and of course, as a pathologist, I deal with cancer all the time, since most of my work has been involved in the diagnosis of cancer. Cancer is the leading cause of death in St. Lucia.
Yes.
There is no doubt it's a serious problem. And of course, what we are trying to dissect out with this particular project is focusing on what is the role of water pollution and cancer in Soufriere. That's really what we're trying to sort out.
Yes. So for those persons who are not aware, the Global Environment Facility Small Grants Program has an office in St. Lucia, and the Flowing Clean project is sponsored, funded primarily by Jeff Small Grants, UNDP, through the ProCarry Plus project. And as Dr. King explained, he sits on the committee, and his role deals with the health impact on the projects as they pertain to the work that they will be doing in St. Lucia. So, Dr. King, I was very, very pleased that you agreed to join our committee dealing with this issue. And as you rightly mentioned, cancer is a leading cause of death in St. Lucia. So we were trying to figure out whether the water that we have in Soufriere, the water that we drink, the water that we recreate in, could possibly be a contributing factor to, or could be linked, I think would be the better word, to the incidences of cancer in Soufriere. So we will be conducting a survey that Dr. King has been instrumental in helping us put together with Dr. Adwalia Février Paul. So let's talk a little bit about that cancer survey, Dr. King. What do you expect to be able to draw from that cancer survey?
So what we want to do is we want to discuss with people in Soufriere in a house-to-house manner. What has cancer affected them? Has cancer affected anybody in their family? We would like to do the research to find out what type of cancer that may be. We would like to find out what the status of the person with cancer is. For instance, has the person demised or is the person still alive? We will also want to do it by community because the different communities have different water catchments in Soufriere. So we want to also link the incidence, prevalence of cancer with water catchments. And we also want to analyze the catchments in terms of the chemical analysis of those catchments, looking at especially pesticides, but other chemicals too. I mean, we're trying to see if we could get additional funding as well, do things like microplastics and other chemicals that may be associated with cancer. So we're actually hoping at the end of it to come up with the survey, we'll get an idea as to what's the burden of cancer in Soufriere. It'll also allow us to identify communities and catchments that we need to do further investigation into. So for instance, we might find that the Font-Saint-Jacques community has a lower incidence than the new development community, or the other way around. And we might find, well, there's a different catchment, and then we look at those catchments. We also want to look at for instance, there's a catchment, the source. There is the quality of the water that comes out of the pipe, or the quality of the stored water, depending on what people are doing. So yes, we really want to look at all these variables. And in case people think this is just a theoretical thing, our sister island, Martinique, years ago, produced a paper where an organochlorine pesticide called chlordipone was closely associated and was even considered causative of prostate cancer in Martinique. And that's a persistent chemical in their soils. It was used in the banana industry, in particular in the French islands. And so that's one chemical. There's another chemical which is very common in St. Lucia, by the way, glyphosate, which is Roundup. Roundup has been associated with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma as a class 2A carcinogen by the IARC. A class 2A is one where we have clear animal studies that show this is a carcinogen, but we don't have enough human data to make it a class 1 carcinogen, which is a definite carcinogen. But the 2A is really highly probable carcinogen. So we want to do some of this work, this research work in Lucia. The survey is the first part of it. I'd like to encourage Soufrierians to take part in the survey, and we need good, clear, honest, open communication. The better the information, the better the research is going to be. The study, the money allows us to hire a few interviewers to go around and administer the survey. We also want to have an online component that people can participate and do the online survey as well. So the more people we survey, the better. But we are looking this is a case control study we're doing. So we're trying to find cancer cases and non-cancer cases by water catchment and do case control. So in other words, in one catchment, how many cancers, how many non-cancers, they must be age matched, gender matched, and so on, so that we can then, as you could appreciate, dissect out what is the role of the water in any cancer that we see. And then, of course, do the chemical analysis, which we can then further say, well, this chemical in the water is causing this problem. And why is that important? Because then we can then have strategies to reduce those chemicals and clean up our water supply, which we should be doing anyway. But it's really good to have evidence that you can put in front of the government and say, look, this is worthwhile investing money in this, because these are the lives it's going to save. This is the burden of disease to save. Because, Nadia, the thing about cancer is a slow killer. So people are sick with cancer for a long time. A lot of money is spent when you cure yourself. And yes, you may, but the truth is it costs money. It costs money to families and to governments. So this is an important, very important study, and the first of its kind. And I think studies like this may very well be replicated in other communities in St. Lucia. But Soufriere is blazing the trail on this one.
Definitely. So for persons' benefit, we are preparing the survey right now, as Dr. King explained, and we have gone through the phase of what's called pilot testing, where we sent the survey out to some persons for them to respond for us to see whether we needed to change some of the questions, break them up, change their position, because we didn't want it to be leading. So in preparing your survey, you have to be very careful how you word your questions so that persons don't think what you're asking is not what you're asking. So we have gone through that first phase, and we are in the process of rewording some of the questions, reorganizing the order of the questions, and transferring the survey to a different platform. We have to go through an ethics committee in St. Lucia, especially as we are dealing with patient health information. And of course, I want to reassure persons listening that the interviewers, the enumerators that we will be sending out will be professional persons, mature persons who would understand the confidentiality of the questions that they're going to be asking. And of course, when we get the results, nobody's name is going to be linked to the data when we are preparing the reports and the results. So there's anonymity in the survey design. So we will be protecting persons' personal information. But we want, as Dr. King said, persons to be honest and to answer the questions to the best of their ability, so that we get the right information, the correct data, so that we can make those correlations if there are any. So we want to see, we have started with the first round of data that we have gathered from the Ministry of Health. And I remember at the meeting we had, Dr. King, between you, myself, and Dr. Février, Nurse Alexander, who is the PNO for Soufriere, is also on that committee, but she was absent at that meeting. You realize that something popped out immediately just by getting some information, which was not complete from what I gather. Looking at cancer information from 2015, something popped out at you. Do you want to speak a little bit about that?
Oh yes, there was. What I found interesting was there's a particular type of cancer called mycosis fungoides, which is a lymphoma that affects the skin. Okay, and what struck me is that it's not a common cancer. So in my pathology practice over the last 30 or so years, I might see about maybe 2 or 3 mycosis fungoides cases per year. But Soufriere, it was interesting. There were, I thought, a high number of those cases in the data that was produced from the SLUHIS. We had, I forget how many now, but something like about 20 something.
Yes, more than 20
cases. And when you look at cases of cancer in Soufriere from 2015, I forget how many we're looking at now, but that's maybe up to maybe about maybe 150 or so, maybe 200 cases of cancer.
100, it was 146 that we saw.
That's right. And I think the ministry has given us a little bit more data of another 72 or so cases from 2018. So, but the mycosis fungoides at that level of about 20 is fairly high. In fact, it's high. And the question is, does that speak to something? Are Soufrierians at a greater risk of that particular type of cancer. And, you know, and we also, you know, Nadia, we're going to have to look at, when we're looking at our data, we're going to have to look at the robustness of our data. We may have to review and make sure at the end of the day that what we called mycosis fungoides was truly mycosis fungoides, you know. So some of that data, some of that work we can also do to make sure that we have good data. But on the surface, first look was surprising to me. And because it's a type of lymphoma, that's interesting because, you know, lymphoma are cancers of the lymphocytes. And remember, I mentioned to you that Roundup is associated with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Also, there's certain viruses that are associated with lymphoma, especially a virus that's quite common in our country, HTLV1 virus, which is blood and sexually transmitted. So, I mean, you know, these are potential causes of something like mycosis fungoides. So, you know, this is really very interesting and I think groundbreaking research that we're going to be doing. I'm really looking forward to the results. I think, and Nadia, what is in about 6 months or so, we should have completed our analysis.
Definitely. We met the Soufriere River Systems Management Committee. We met last week, and we agreed to move forward with the water testing using Mr. Charlemagne's lab. So I am going to get in contact with him for us to get that organized, because I really wanted him to get the sampling done before the end of the month, actually, and for us to have those samples shipped so that we would get the results by the end of August, September. The cancer survey, once it is completed, we have to wait on the approval, I guess, from the ethics committee. That's what we are working on, to put in an application to the ethics committee, and that's going to take hopefully not that much time. But once we have that approval, we will then have the survey that will be in 2 parts, self-administered for some persons, and then for us to have enumerators going out to administer questions in some areas. So we are aiming for completing this epidemiology component very, like you said, within 6 months. And from all my consultations, like I mentioned to the committee before, this was the component that garnered the most interest from every single community that I went to. It was interesting, though, that when I had the discussions at the end of my presentations and I was asking persons whether there was an issue with cancer in their community, some communities, the immediate answer was they were looking at each other, no, not really, just a few cases. And some communities was yes. Off the top, they were naming persons who had or who had passed away from cancer. So for the interest, other than from the medical community, from you, and I know you mentioned that Dr. Owen Gabriel was also very interested in it, the community in general, persons were interested in knowing whether their water was safe to drink, whether there were any chemicals, because we do have certain communities that have been querying the water quality. And one of the questions that we're asking in the survey is to look at what person's primary source of drinking water is. And interestingly enough, in the discussions in the communities, persons have been telling me already that they don't think that the water is safe for them to drink. That's why they now drink bottled water. But even if the bottled water, we have our cause for questions. I mean, I'm going to let you speak about that one, because you were the one who asked whether we could increase our scope in this project to test for microplastics. Let me talk about that.
Yeah, well, you know, so microplastics are relatively new in terms of health effects of microplastics. It's only in the last 10 years or so you've seen people talk about microplastics in a mainstream sort of way. But if you think about it, bottled water is in a plastic container, and it will be, depending on how it is stored, the conditions under which it is stored, it is well worthwhile sampling bottled water and seeing what's in bottled water as well. In research, I think you make no assumptions. in research, you go forward with a hypothesis and you go forward with a strategy to explore all aspects of that hypothesis, which is what you're looking for. In our case, we're looking at the relationship between cancer and water. So we're going to go forward and say, what is the relationship between cancer and water? So we need to look at all sources of water. We need to look at all the cancers, look at all the cancers in relation to the sources of water, and then we need to test the water. And that includes bottled water. Because we may find, who knows, that bottled water is a bigger problem than we thought. And a lot of us have a sort of gut, I would call it, common sense approach. We'd say, well, if the river is not clean, then I'm going to use bottled water. Now, that makes a lot of sense, right? It makes a lot of sense, you would think. But the truth is that borne out by the science of the quality of that water? And that's a question we want to be able to answer for Soufrierians. And in 6 months, I really hope we can present back to Soufriere what the findings are, so that people can be guided not so much by what their instinct tells them, but by fact and science.
Yes, definitely. Yeah? We have a question online from Sheldon Lionel. Other than chlorine water, can we use to treat our water? So he's asking, other than chlorine, what can we use to treat our water? Let me let you answer that question.
That's a good question. No, but first of all, I have to say I'm not a water expert. But you can do certain things. There are many ways of treating water. So, for instance, you have filtration systems you can use. So you can have filters that remove particulate matter. Then you have carbon filters which you can use, which will then remove chemicals. You can then, in fact, put the water into UV light, which then kills bacteria. So that, for instance, is a way of treating water coming into your house. So you filter it through those filters, and you have a UV light. And these systems are available, and that would render your water relatively particulate-free, chemical-free, and bacteria-free. Right? Now, those are not cheap, though. But that is one way of treating water. And chlorine is a very cheap way now, but chlorine is really just looking at bacteria. Chlorine is there to kill the bacteria in water. So that is trying to prevent the gastroenteritis and those things that in the past killed many people, especially children, right? And so chlorination of water and water supply came out as a strategy to reduce disease and death from gastroenteritis, from bacteria that were in water. There are many people that debate, is chlorine still the best way to treat our water? That's a question that I think WASCO and authorities and us from a scientific point of view need to answer. We have not addressed that problem, but it is something that I agree with the person who has raised the question. It is something to be raised. What is the impact of the chlorination of our water? Is it still working in our best interest or not? And these are clear scientific questions that need to be answered.
Yes, and I think is a little bit beyond the scope of our project, though. Unless Jeff wants to give us a large grant for us to do that on a national level.
But you know the beautiful thing about research. We do our research. We have to be very focused and strategic on our research, which is really looking at chemical pollution of water and any association with cancer. That's brilliant. Now, what the caller or what the writer has just raised is something that we can then pass on and say, well, by the way, this has been raised, and this is something that you guys may want to consider, and that may be something for another research, another set of science to inform policy and therefore healthy action. Because this is how, in this modern time, with the type of technology we have, this is how we are supposed to be approaching the challenges and the problems that we face. It's not because Nadia or Dr. King are experts and we say, oh, by the way, you should really do this. You should just listen to us. You should say, hello, where's your evidence? Can I see your evidence? If you don't have evidence, is there a way of gathering the evidence? If we cannot gather the evidence, what's the safest course in the meantime? Life is all about risk management, and science and fact informs risk management. And
Definitely.
that's why I'm really pleased to be involved in this particular project. Because like I said, this has not been done anywhere else.
In St. Lucia.
So, and it's a great start. So I agree. Chlorination of water is not something we're going to be addressing in this particular study, but it may be raised as an issue. And it is something that, so when we do our research, we might find that the chlorinated water source has a particular health effect. We may find that in terms of cancer. We may find it. We may not. We may find that the chlorinated water is actually the safest water. We may find that too, in terms of when from a cancer perspective,
yes.
when we test. So, so my friend, just to answer the question for you, I think it's a valid question. It's not one we're going to be able to answer in the next 6 months, but it is one that I think should be raised for people to take forward.
Yes. Let me just give some more information. In Soufriere, we have 6 water catchments, 3 in Fonce-Jacques, 1 in Ruby, where the spring is mixed with the Ruby River, as well as 2 in Diamond number 1 and Diamond number 2. In Soufriere, the only treatment that WASCO does is chlorination, which, as Dr. King says, it kills bacteria. I know environmental health tests on occasion for the levels of chlorine, and once the levels are below their test levels, they immediately notify WASCO for them to go and add additional chlorine. All our water sources come from springs, including Ruby. Like I said, Ruby is the spring and the river. We did some testing of springs in Wavinclair in 2018, and we found bacteria in the spring water, E. coli, and fecal coliforms that cause gastroenteritis. We also found some chemicals. We tested for some organophosphates. We found malathion, parathion, chlorpyrifos, dimethoate, and a couple of other chemicals in very small quantities in that spring water. And that is the testing that was done, again, through a Jeff-funded project that we focused on the Wavinclair as a micro watershed. And it is from doing that testing that Dr. King and Dr. Springer were pushed for us getting additional funding for us to do this cancer survey. And as he said, it has never been done. So in addition to testing for organophosphates, we're also testing for organochlorides, and like Dr. King mentioned, chlordecone, which is an organochloride and has been linked to increased cancer cases of prostate and breast cancer in Martinique and Guadeloupe. We will be testing for that chemical as well. We'll also be testing for heavy metals, and some of the heavy metals cause other medical illnesses. That is not my field, that is Dr. King's field. So I'll let him speak about why we're testing for heavy metals in our water as well.
Yeah, and heavy metals and arsenic. So heavy metals, for instance, things like mercury, and many people will have heard about this, is associated with neurological problems, hematological problems. So so the heavy metals are cadmium. Cadmium has been associated also with a number of diseases in us as humans. So we're going to be looking at all of those things. Arsenic is a carcinogen. It's found in groundwater. So spring waters often will have arsenic in them. Now, just to stick a pin for people, because there's a particular chemical, there's also the amount of chemical, especially these heavy metals. This is something like arsenic. There are certain levels that are acceptable and certain levels that are not acceptable. And that's so low, because it's well known that you can have cadmium and arsenic occurring naturally in waters, right? Based on the soil and the types of geoformations that we have and the soil we have. But it's the levels that are important. And then, of course, maybe the treatments you may then have to do. So that's why we're also looking at heavy metals. They're associated with cancers, they're associated with neurological conditions, and they're associated with hematological conditions, which is blood disorders.
Yes.
Okay.
So for the levels,
I was going to say
sorry,
something.
Go ahead.
What's that? Go ahead.
No, I said go ahead.
Tell me.
No, I was interrupting you just to say that some of these chemicals, we're looking at the levels, what's acceptable and what's acceptable, and some of these chemicals do what we call bioaccumulation. So even though they're present in some small quantities, for some chemicals, your body, your kidneys can remove those chemicals through excretion, through your urine. But in some chemicals, they stay in the body and they just accumulate after a time, and that's when it creates a problem. But let me let you finish your point, Dr. King. Sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, that's a great point. You're right. So that is why the identifying the type of chemical and the types of diseases is so important, because then, we can say this is a bioaccumulating chemical and this one is not. So we're going to do all that analysis, which I think is going to be very interesting when we get to that point, when we have all the data in and we start to analyze what's happening. But I was going to say, Nadia is a very good point about coliforms and the level of bacterial contamination of a lot of our water sources. And that speaks back to what the gentleman who wrote in, chlorination. Chlorination in the Soufriere water may very well be the absolute right thing to do based on the amount of coliforms that and fecal contamination that we are seeing. Because it may render that water a lot safer because it will knock off those bacteria. So, that's why we have to be careful how we jump to conclusions. That's why we want to do research and then inform policy and inform action from research rather than just jump into conclusions,
Yes, definitely. So chlorination is important in our water treatment in St. Lucia for killing off harmful bacteria. And persons tend to think that chlorine, when they drink water, if the water is white, it has chlorine. No, chlorine doesn't make your water white. It is the mixing of air in the water. The water bubbles get so tiny that it makes the water look cloudy. So when you leave your water to stand, after a while, all that air comes out and the water turns back clear. So I know we have a misconception in St. Lucia that once the water is white, that it has a high level of chlorine. That's not quite the case. In our testing, we are going to be looking at certain water sources. And initially, we only were looking at doing 12 sample points. But we are hopefully going to be getting some additional funding from the National Conservation Fund, as well as possibly through the NIC, another committee that Dr. King sits on, for us to expand the scope of our water quality tests. So we're looking at including, for sure, when I went to the communities of Chateaubele and Bouton, they get their water from catchments outside of the Soufriere watershed. Well, not quite. In Chateaubele, the water catchment is within the Soufriere watershed, but that water goes to the Delce water treatment facility, which is just chlorination again, and then it is pumped to Fonjalib, Montlacroix, as well as Chateaubele. So it's tapped within the Soufriere watershed, but it comes from a catchment, a treatment facility that's in the Choiseul community, and Bouton gets their water from cannery. So we will be testing those two once we get the additional funds. I have another question or another comment from Sheldon. Since we are tapping to the water sources high above the residential area, are we expecting microplastics and heavy metals in this water? I'm glad you asked that question because for two reasons. One, we are looking at the source of the catchment and what happens around it. And I can tell you for some of those catchments, there are agricultural activities happening very close to the water catchment, in fact. Something that never happened way back in maybe the 80s, as far back as the 80s. There's one particular water catchment that we realized from a site visit. When we were visiting the area, we actually saw somebody spraying bananas alongside the fence of the catchment area. And we were told that the landowner, let's say the grandfather, he did not do any farming past the corner of where that catchment is located. But since he passed away and the land has been divided amongst his children, the children's children are now farming every single plot of land, and that includes farming right alongside the water catchment. And we were all shocked. Everybody on that field tour was shocked to see somebody spraying bananas alongside the fence where a water catchment is that is collecting water to feed persons in the community and beyond, because Fonsejack's water catchment feeds as far as Choiseul. Um, for finding microplastics and heavy metals, I'm not sure if we're going to find microplastics in our spring water, but that's not out of the not necessarily in the spring, but maybe along the pipes, since we do use PVC pipes. I'm just thinking out loud, but I don't think we'd find microplastics coming from the spring water, but heavy metals definitely. Soufriere, we are volcanic, and like Dr. King was alluding to, there are some chemicals that you find, or some, chemicals. So metal is a chemical that you would find in the soil, and the spring water, think of it, is groundwater. Basically, it rains, the water seeps through the soil and enters porous rock. So some rocks can actually hold water because they have very small lines and they fill up with water. And you get a spring where there is a brick in that porous rock on the surface, and that is how you get a spring. So springs are rainwater or surface water that is trapped underground. That's why it's called groundwater. So if you have chemicals, the soil has been sprayed with different chemicals over a period of time and it rains, that would dissolve in the water and enter your groundwater. So what we were seeing in the groundwater for some of the chemicals that we were seeing, when I presented that at a previous Jeff forum, the chairman of the pesticides board in St. Lucia was appalled. And he's like, are you sure? He was trying to verify that we used sterile conditions in collecting the sample, and I had to tell him I wasn't the one who did the sampling. We actually had the technician from CAFA who was the one who came down to Soufriere with their sterile equipment to collect the samples and then send the samples to a lab in Canada for treatment, in fact, a university lab in Canada for testing. So I was able to assure him that the sampling that we did met standards, and what we found in the water was actually what is in the water without any source of external contamination to add to the water. And he was appalled because he told me that some of the chemicals that he saw on the results that I presented to him were from chemicals that were banned in the 1980s, but we're still seeing them in the spring water. And some of those chemicals are known to be, or probably, carcinogenic according to the International Agency for Cancer Research. So for us, it was a sobering thing to find that in the spring water. That is why we designed this Flowing Clean project with additional funding from Jeff Small Grants and ProCarib for us to continue the work. And everybody has been saying that this is, and like Dr. King said, groundbreaking. It has not been done before for us to test the springs, the tap water at the after the catchment, as well as to test the river where persons recreate, for us to see whether there is, what the levels are, to find out, first of all, what is in the water. We're going in with the assumption that there is nothing in there. The testing will tell us what is in there. The questionnaire from the cancer survey will give us an idea as to where we have cancer cases and what the types of cancer cases are. And then we are going to be able to look at the results and see, is there a correlation? Can we say that maybe there's a cluster of a particular type of cancer in a certain area and they get their water from a particular catchment? And we are hoping that the results that we get, the report that we generate, the paper that we produce is going to help change policy if it needs to be changed. And if we need to increase the type of treatment or improve the type of treatment that WASCO does in Soufriere, that would be able, we will have results to make a case to argue for that and to take it to the policymakers, to take it to WASCO for them to take a look at. And I have already had discussions with WASCO. We're going to have some formal meetings with them for us to present the full scope of our work to them, because WASCO is integral in that, as solid waste is integral in the garbage disposal component. WASCO is integral in the water testing component, since we are testing the water from the catchments, before the catchments, after treatment, and from the tap. So this is where we are hoping to go with our project. And let me just say that the lines are open if anybody wants to call, because we are coming on up on 11:30. We started late, so we're ending a little bit late today. If anybody wants to call or comment, you can go call the numbers. They're listed on the screen for those persons who are listening on the radio. The number is 730-5388, 459-7885, 459-7888. Or you can call me on my cell phone, message me, 519-2425, and I will read out your comments. Or you can type it on Facebook if you are following 88.5 on Facebook. We have additional comments from Sheldon. Dr. King, are you concerned about the level of cancer on Ireland, and what do you think contributes to the growing number of cases?
Yes, I am. But just before I answer that particular question, I want to come back to the persistent organic pollutants that you mentioned. And chlordicone, for instance, which is a ban, it has been banned since the 80s. That is a persistent pollutant. I mean, the Martinicans make the case that it will take them a couple centuries to remove chlordicone from their environment. So, you know, that's why you said, Nadia, we're going to be looking for that, because that may very well be a chemical that was used, 30, 40 years ago. Anyway, to answer that question, am I concerned about cancer in St. Lucia? Yes, of course. It's I think, not to say that it is extraordinarily high versus the rest of the world. That's not the point I want to make. The point I want to make is that we do have more cancer. Cancer is at the top of killers in terms of diseases. So clearly it is of concern. The other thing about cancer is that all cancer can be treated, and many cancers can be prevented. And that is I think the real message that we want to get across. So hence we need to know what type of cancers we're dealing with, what are the causes of the cancers, and what can we do as people. And cancer has multifactorial causes, okay? Cancer is not a simple, this chemical causes this cancer. It's not as simple as that. There are multiple factors. So for instance, what you've inherited, both epigenetics and genetics, your lifestyle, your gender, your age, all these factors are variables. And nowadays we're appreciating that inflammation in your body is one of the factors that can contribute to cancer. We've also figured out that stress can cause inflammation, lack of sleep can cause inflammation. So in other words, we are now discovering that there are so many things in our lifestyle that might be contributing to our cancer. Bear in mind our immune systems, which are very susceptible to environment, including our internal and external environment. Our immune system, which you'd appreciate, is very stress related. High stress causes immune deficiencies. And our immune system is what protects us from cancers. So you can now begin to understand why there are so many factors, and why, as health practitioners, we approach cancer in a far more holistic way now. And we tell people that, what you eat, how you sleep, how you exercise, how you manage stress in your life, all of these are preventative measures to be taken to protect yourself from cancer. Now, in this particular study, we're looking at the relationship between chemicals and cancer in particular populations in Soufriere. It's one factor. It will not answer all the questions, right, as to why some particular individual got a particular cancer. But it will be one of the factors that we will be looking at, because there are well-known associations. So to answer your question, yes, I'm concerned. And yes, I do think that our health services need to respond. If something is a number one killer, we must respond. And nowadays, with the technology that's available, there's really great news with cancer management, from prevention all the way through to treatment now. Because cancer, we appreciate, can be very well treated. Indeed, the death from cancers across the world is dropping based on health interventions. and lifestyle interventions. So we want to do that. Let's take a classic example. HPV infections in women causing cancer of the cervix. You'd appreciate that 99% of cancers of the cervix are caused by high-risk HPV, which is about 14 different strains, 3 main ones. And right now, the Ministry of Health for the last year, just over a year, has been doing widespread screening for high-risk HPV in our women, to identify women who are at a greater risk and treating these women to prevent cancer of the cervix, which is actually still a big killer of women in St. Lucia. These are the kinds of things we want to do. So that is why I think cancer is very important, because we can intervene, we can treat, we can prevent death from cancer, and that's what we need to do.
Definitely. We have some comments online. Kern says she's looking forward to the results of the project, and she's asking whether the message of water pollution from this project will be spread nationally and not just confined to Soufriere. And she says that she believes that we need to have a sense of national pride that leads us to protect our environment. While I do have this radio program, Flowing Clean, which is being broadcast online, I have already contacted at least 2 talk shows in Castries that hopefully in August I can make an appearance on those shows and to take this project, word of this project and what we're doing in Soufriere nationally, because we have sent some press releases out. We have sent some packages for the news media out, and it's gotten very little coverage nationally. For me, I find that when we have events in Soufriere and we invite the media, they tend not to show up. The Soufriere Foundation has stepped up, and with their communications team, they would prepare the package with audio, with video, with sound bites that the radio stations or the television stations can put their news together. But I am quite honestly disappointed with national media from the time I started working as a teacher, working with SMMA, and now working with Caribbean Sea Waterways. Sending out press releases, it doesn't get covered. And I've spoken to some media houses, the editors, and they have told me that they need to put out what's going to attract the public. And I think that's doing a disservice to us in this country, that when you turn on the news, all you see is either politics, crime, or whichever company sponsors their show, then they put that information out. For me, we are continuing to get the word out through targeted media houses in sending the information across to them. It is up to them if they're going to cover it, and then I will be appearing on the talk shows as the project progresses throughout the year. I will attempt to see if I could go on every single one of them to have a discussion, and because they all have different audiences, different target audiences. Going back to the work that we're doing in Soufriere, I know some persons have asked whether we will be expanding our project area, and for this current project, Flowing Clean, in its current funding cycle, we do not have funds for us to expand and go any further, but we're not opposed, definitely, for seeking additional funding for us to continue our phase 2 of this project once we're done, because Flowing Clean ends, like I said, December of 2026, and we are trying to get a lot done in a very short space of time. And I want to just appeal to the Soufriere public when we do have our surveys out, because we have 2 surveys that are going out. One, a perception survey on the Soufriere River, how persons view the river, how persons utilize the river. If they do utilize the river, do they want to improve the water quality in the river? Do they want to improve the aesthetics of the river? How are they willing to assist us in getting that done? And the cancer survey, of course, where we would have trained enumerators who will be going out asking the questions, or if somebody wants to answer the questions online, we would have a self-administered option of doing that. Since we are coming down to the end, Dr. King, let me just invite you if you have any closing comments you want to make.
Yeah, well, I wanted to come back to what the question on exposure of the findings. And at the Jeff committee level, we are a national committee with international links, and we intend to show these results nationally as well as internationally. So that's what we intend to do. So I do think that the results from this research will be seen island-wide. I also think that it's very important that right now we do a very good job, a very robust research. Yes, ethical, of course, but also very robust from a scientific process point of view in terms of our case control study, peer review that will be done. That's why we cannot extend too far. We need to be very focused on the resources that we have and show, and then from what we show with a robust study, then people can say, well, let them expand it and do something more with a similar methodology in a wider space, wider geographic space. But and I mean, I want to commend Nadia Cazaubon because, you know, I mean, she's like a pit bull, eh? So she's when she tells you she's going on all the media shows, believe her. I'm very impressed with her focus and her commitment to getting this project done. I think that kind of passion and commitment is important. In fact, you made me remember, I must tell you, when I was in Soufriere, there was a gentleman in Soufriere, Mr. Kirby Lamontagne, yes, who I remember very well because your spirit, in a way, reminds me of his. In that he was also a man who was exceedingly passionate and committed to whatever challenge he felt needed to be addressed in the Soufriere community. So I'm glad to see that Soufriere in these generations now still has that kind of spirit. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. King. And I do remember Mr. Lamontagne. In fact, him and my grand aunt's husband, they were the ones who were able to get an X-ray machine for Soufriere, the Soufriere Hospital, through the Friends of Soufriere. And they've done quite a bit. So I take that compliment. Thank you very much. And let me just extend the same to you as our lead pathologist. When I was much younger, in fact, at convent, I had a doctor's appointment with Dr. Granderson Didier. And she was like, baby girl, do you think you want to do medicine? Dr. King needs help. Maybe you should go into pathology. I'm like, that one was no. Yeah, she tried to steer me. She tried to steer me to go into medicine and to do pathology, but I guess that was not my purpose here. So thank you very much, Dr. King, for all the work you have done as a medical doctor, a medical practitioner, also with the ICANN group and now with the RISE. I remember ICANN. I worked with ICANN with you and Dr. Bird. Yeah. Definitely. And we had an ICANN group in Soufriere that I worked with. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. It has benefited us in St. Lucia greatly. And I am trying to do my part here in Soufriere so that we can improve our environment. As we started from the very beginning, your health is your wealth, and the environment greatly impacts on your health. Sheldon just told us, great show with a thumbs up. Thank you, Sheldon. So for us in getting this project done, Flowing Clean, which is funded by Jeff Small Grants and ProCarib, I want to just extend our thanks to you, Dr. King, as part of the committee, the National Steering Committee that approved this project, for us to get the funding, for us to get the work done in Soufriere. And for all Soufrierians, it is now our turn to step up, to do our part, to speak to our family, our friends, our neighbors, to do what needs to be done in terms of improving the river, stop throwing garbage in the river, change our habits, and join us on this innovative, this groundbreaking project to restore the Soufriere River. Let Soufriere be the beacon. Let Soufriere be the lead in St. Lucia in turning around our watershed so that our generations living and future generations to come will be able to enjoy Soufriere and to get it back to as pristine a condition as we can. Let me say thank you, Dr. King, for joining me. I'm pretty sure I will be inviting you on the show again later down the line. Hopefully, maybe before we even get our results, once we have our preliminary results, I can bring you back on the show for us to have another discussion. Hopefully, we can get more persons commenting online and calling in. The lines have remained silent for the first 4 shows. So I want to just encourage the public, if you're listening, to call in when our shows continue. Every Tuesday from 10:30 to 11. Well, so far we've been going way past 11. For you to talk to us, to give your comments, your feedback, and engage with us as we roll out our Flowing Clean project. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you, Dr. King, for joining me. And I will see you very shortly, I guess, when we have our next meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Everybody have a wonderful, wonderful Tuesday.
Thank you.
So the table got me name. A future full of love is so we gonna claim. I'm so boy, it's the message. You're so fresh. I tell you, keep the river clean, keep the river clean. Keep the river clean, keep the river. I tell you, please keep the river clean. I beg you, please keep the river clean. No more trashing of the water, keep the river clean. Let we preserve for the future, keep the river clean. The time to act is now. So what we gonna do? We are the guardians of the river. Let we start anew. Pollution.